The hum of my old Singer's sewing machine was a familiar comfort, a lullaby I'd known for decades. My hands, gnarled with age but still steady, guided a length of sky blue fabric under the needle. It was a simple dress, really, for Timothy's graduation party. Nothing fancy, but I always felt a piece of my heart went into every stitch. Timothy, my youngest grandson, was turning 18 this year. It felt like only yesterday I was piecing together a tiny quilt for his crib, a patchwork of little blue and white squares. I'd done that for all my grandchildren, you know. Each one a labor of love. My name is Margaret O'Connor, and at 78 years old, I've spent most of my life here in Willow Creek, my hands shaping fabric, and my heart shaping a family. This house, the one I'd worked so hard to pay off, has been the anchor for all of us. It's seen more birthdays and holidays than I can count, heard more laughter and arguments than any four walls should. My children, Jason and Rebecca, grew up here. And then their children, my grandchildren, filled these rooms with their own brand of chaos and joy. I remember when Jason, my eldest, was starting college. He was so bright, so full of promise. The tuition was steep, but I dipped into my savings, the money I'd put aside for a rainy day, or maybe even a little trip for myself someday. It's an investment in his future, Margaret, I told myself, and I gave him the check, a substantial sum, without a second thought. He thanked me, of course, but it was a quick, almost perfunctory nod before he was off chasing his dreams. Rebecca, my daughter, needed help too, years later when her car broke down unexpectedly. "Just a loan, Mom. I swear I'll pay you back," she'd promised, her eyes wide with worry. I handed her the cash, knowing deep down it was more of a gift. It always was. Holidays were always a flurry of activity, and I loved it. I'd spend weeks making sure each grandchild had a gift, something special, something I'd either sewn or carefully picked out. Timothy, bless his heart, would always give me a big hug, but the others, well, a quick "thanks, Grandma," was usually the extent of it before they tore into the next present. It wasn't about the thanks, not really. It was about seeing their faces light up, or so I told myself. Lately, though, it felt less like giving and more like an expectation. Just last month, Timothy had mentioned, almost in passing, that he was eyeing a used car for his upcoming birthday. "It's a real fixer-upper, Grandma, but it's got potential," he'd said, his eyes gleaming. A few days later, a text popped up on my phone from him. "Hey, Grandma, could you spot me $3,000 for the down payment? I can totally pay you back once I start my summer job. No, please, no, would you mind? Just a casual request, as if I were an ATM. Of course, I sent it. What else was I going to do? He's my grandson. He needed it." Rebecca, my daughter, had a habit of treating my home like a community center. Her book club met here every other Tuesday, leaving a trail of crumbs and half-empty wine glasses for me to clean up. Her friends would wander through my garden, picking flowers without asking, and sometimes I'd find a forgotten sweater or a coffee mug on my porch days later. "Oh, Mom, you don't mind, do you?" she'd say, flashing her bright smile. "It's just so much cozier here than at my place." And I never did mind. Not truly. Family is everything after all. Or so I believed. The other day, I was in my sewing room, putting the finishing touches on a cushion cover I'd promised Rebecca for her patio furniture. The door was ajar, and I could hear her talking to Jason in the living room. They thought I was out in the garden, I suppose. Honestly, Mom's sewing is so old-fashioned, Rebecca sighed, her voice laced with a dismissive tone. Who even wears handmade dresses anymore? It's sweet, I guess, but a bit much, don't you think? She just needs to relax, enjoy her golden years, not be slaving over a machine. Jason chuckled, a dry, almost cynical sound. Yeah, well, it keeps her busy, I guess. At least she's not bothering us. The needle paused in my hand. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Old-fashioned? Not bothering them? It wasn't just a cushion cover I was making. It was a piece of me, a piece of my love. And it felt like they were taking it, and everything else I offered, for granted. The threads of sacrifice, I realized, were starting to feel less like love and more like a noose. The sting of Rebecca's casual dismissal about my sewing lingered, a tiny splinter under my skin that refused to fade. I tried to shake it off, telling myself they didn't mean anything by it, but the feeling of being taken for granted, of being seen as simply a resource, was growing harder to ignore. A few weeks later, we gathered for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner at Jason's house. It was his youngest son's birthday, and the house was buzzing with the usual family chatter. I found myself at the end of the long dining table, a little out of the main flow of conversation. I started to tell a story about my childhood, about how my own grandmother taught me to embroider, a skill that had served me well all these years. And she always said, Margaret, every stitch tells a story. I began, but my voice was quickly drowned out. My granddaughter, Sarah, who was sitting across from me, rolled her eyes so dramatically I almost missed it. Oh, Grandma, not another one of your old stories, she muttered, loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. She then turned to her cousin, Timothy, who was sitting next to me, and whispered something that made him chuckle, a quick, embarrassed sound. A moment later, my great-nephew, a boisterous 10-year-old, shouted out a silly joke about a talking dog, and the entire table erupted in laughter. My own story, my own small attempt to connect, was lost, forgotten before it had even truly begun. I just smiled weakly and picked at my food, the warmth of the room suddenly feeling very cold. Later, as we were clearing the plates, Jason cornered me by the kitchen island. He looked tired, his brow furrowed with what I assumed were financial worries. He'd been complaining about the rising cost of living, about how tough it was to keep up with everything. Mom, we need to talk, he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. Rebecca and we've been thinking, this house of yours, it's a big asset, you know? It's worth a lot, especially with the market the way it is. I looked at him, confused. It's my home, Jason. It's paid off. I've worked my whole life for it. He waved a dismissive hand. Yes, of course, and we appreciate that. But think about it, Mom. You're 78. Do you really need all this space? All these repairs? It's a lot of upkeep for one person. If you were to sell it, you could move into a smaller place, maybe a nice retirement community, and the rest of the money, well, that could really help us out. It's family money, after all. My jaw tightened. Family money? I repeated, the words tasting bitter. It's my money, Jason, and my home. He sighed, clearly frustrated. Mom, don't be difficult. We're just trying to be practical. Think of all the good that money could do for the family, for your grandchildren. It's not like you're using it for anything important. He walked off before I could respond, leaving me standing there, my hands clutching a stack of dirty plates, not using it for anything important. My home, my sanctuary, my legacy. Was that not important? The feeling of being pushed aside only grew stronger in the following weeks. I'd always been the one to host holiday dinners, to organize family outings to the local park or the annual Willow Creek Fair. But slowly, subtly, I started to notice I wasn't getting the calls anymore. One Saturday, I saw a picture pop up on Rebecca's social media of her, Jason, and all the grandchildren at the fair. They were laughing, holding cotton candy, enjoying themselves. The caption read, "Great day at the fair with the best family." My heart sank. No one had invited me. Later that week, I called Rebecca to ask about it. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice sounding a little too bright, a little too apologetic. "We just put it together last minute. It was all on the group chat, you know. You're not on it, so we just assumed you wouldn't want to come anyway. It was a bit hectic." A group chat. Of course, the digital world had become a barrier, a silent wall between me and my own family. I didn't have a smartphone, didn't understand all those apps. I relied on phone calls, on personal invitations, but those seemed to have dried up. I was being slowly, deliberately excluded. One evening, about a month after the dinner at Jason's, I was in my garden, watering my roses. It was getting dark, but I loved the quiet of the twilight. I heard voices from inside the house. Jason and Rebecca were there again, unannounced, as usual. I paused, listening. Their voices were low, hushed, but the open window carried snippets of their conversation to me. "Just need to figure out the best way to approach it," Jason was saying. "She's so stubborn about it, though," Rebecca replied, her voice tinged with exasperation. "She loves that house more than anything." "It's not about what she loves," Jason retorted, a sharp edge to his tone. "It's about what makes sense for us, for the family. We need to decide what to do with Grandma's house." My watering can slipped from my hand, clattering against the stone path. The sound was loud in the sudden silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. What to do with Grandma's house without me? The words hung in the air, a chilling premonition of something far more sinister than mere disrespect. The clatter of the watering can had startled them, I suppose. When I walked back inside, Jason and Rebecca were standing awkwardly in the living room, trying to look casual. "Mom, you startled us," Rebecca said, a little too loudly, a forced smile plastered on her face. Jason just cleared his throat and avoided my gaze. I didn't press them, didn't ask what they were talking about. My heart was still thumping, and a cold dread had settled in my stomach. I just nodded, feigned tiredness, and went to my room. But the words, "what to do with Grandma's house," echoed in my mind, a sinister melody. A few weeks passed, and the tension in the air was palpable, at least for me. My children, however, acted as if nothing was amiss, calling with their usual requests, dropping by unannounced. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that I was just an old woman imagining things. Family wouldn't hurt me, not my own children. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Jason called. His voice was unusually charming, almost overly so. "Mom, I have a big favor to ask," he began. "Rebecca and I were thinking of starting a small family business, something that could really set us up for the future and honestly provide a legacy for the grandkids." I listened, my hand tightening around the phone receiver. What kind of business, Jason? Well, it's a bit complicated, but it involves some property development, he explained, his words a little vague. And we need a temporary space, a base of operations, for a few months while we get things off the ground. We were hoping, could we use your house, just the downstairs, maybe the garage, for a family project? It would be a huge help, Mom, a real boost for all of us. A family project. The phrase felt like a twisted echo of their earlier conversation, but Jason made it sound so innocent, so beneficial. He spoke of family legacy and future security, words that always tugged at my heartstrings. He knew how to play on my hopes for my grandchildren. I pictured them, all grown up, thriving because of this family project. My house, a temporary hub for their entrepreneurial dreams. It sounded noble, even if a little inconvenient for me. Just for a few months, you say, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Absolutely, Mom. 3, maybe 4 months at most. We'll be in and out. You won't even know we're here. And it'll be a huge step for the family. I hesitated, but only for a moment. My children, my family, they needed me. And what was my house for, if not to help them? All right, Jason, I said, a sigh escaping my lips. You can use it, but please be careful with my things. Thank you, Mom. You're the best, he exclaimed, his voice suddenly full of genuine relief and excitement. This means everything. Over the next few days, I saw them, Jason and Rebecca, whispering in corners of my living room, poring over documents I couldn't quite make out. They'd stop talking abruptly whenever I entered the room, their faces quickly shifting to innocent smiles. I heard snippets of their hushed discussions. The appraisal came in higher than we thought, and we need to make sure she signs the right papers. And it's for the best, really. She wouldn't understand the complexities. I tried to dismiss the unease that coiled in my gut. They were my children. They loved me. They wouldn't do anything to truly hurt me. This was for the family, for the grandchildren. My belief in the sanctity of family, in their inherent goodness, was a shield against the growing suspicion. I had always trusted them implicitly, believed in their good intentions. My home had always been a safe haven, a place where love was the strongest bond. I felt safe, truly, completely safe in their presence. How could I not? They were my flesh and blood. A week later, Jason came over with a stack of papers. Mom, just a few things we need you to sign for the family project, he said, placing them on my kitchen table. It's just some standard paperwork, legal stuff, to make sure everything's above board with the bank for the temporary use of the house. Nothing to worry about. He flipped through the pages quickly, pointing to the signature lines. Here, and just initial these 2 spots. He had a pen ready, uncapped, in his hand. I glanced at the documents. They looked official, full of legal jargon I didn't understand. My eyes, even with my reading glasses, struggled with the small print. I trusted Jason. He was my son, the golden child, the one who always handled the important things. He wouldn't mislead me. It's just to confirm you're allowing us to use the property for the business, Mom, he reassured me, sensing my hesitation. Standard procedure. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly, but not from suspicion, from the slight tremor that came with age. I signed where he indicated, my signature a familiar, slightly shaky scrawl. Each stroke of the pen felt like an act of love, a contribution to my family's future, a testament to my unwavering trust. I was helping my son. I was securing a legacy for my grandchildren. I was walking unknowingly into their trap, believing I was simply doing what any loving mother would do. The papers slid across the table, and Jason gathered them up with a triumphant, almost imperceptible smile. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice a little too casual. "You're the best." The days after I signed those papers were a blur of nervous anticipation. Jason and Rebecca were in and out of the house more frequently, their family project seemingly in full swing. They brought in boxes, made phone calls in hushed tones, and generally treated the place like their own private office. I tried to stay out of their way, retreating to my sewing room or the garden, still believing I was helping them build something wonderful. About a month later, a stack of mail arrived, thicker than usual. Most of it was junk, as always: credit card offers, flyers for local businesses, that sort of thing. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my tea, and began to sort through it, tossing most of it straight into the recycling bin. Then, one envelope caught my eye. It was from a bank I didn't recognize, and it was addressed to occupant, 14 Maple Lane, my address. My name wasn't on it, which was odd. I tore it open, thinking it was probably just another piece of junk mail that had somehow slipped through the cracks. But inside, there wasn't a flyer. There were official-looking documents, thick and heavy, with a bank's logo at the top. My eyes scanned the first few lines, then the next, and a cold dread began to creep up my spine. Loan agreement, the heading read, by Maple Lane, Willow Creek, my house. My heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I pulled out my reading glasses, my hands trembling as I tried to focus on the small print. It was a home equity loan for $150,000, and then I saw it, the signature line. My name, Margaret O'Connor, scrawled in a way that was almost but not quite mine. It was a forgery, a clumsy, cruel imitation of my own hand. The room spun. The teacup clattered against the saucer. $150,000 against my home, without my knowledge. The family project. The papers Jason had asked me to sign. It wasn't for temporary use. It was for this monstrous betrayal. I stumbled out of the kitchen, clutching the papers like a death warrant. I found Jason and Rebecca in the living room, surrounded by their boxes, talking on their phones. They looked up, startled by my sudden appearance, by the wild look in my eyes. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice a shaky whisper, then rising to a roar. "What have you done?" I thrust the loan papers at Jason. He took them, his face paling as he saw what they were. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mom, calm down," Jason said, trying to sound soothing, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I shrieked, the years of quiet patience shattering around me. My name, forged on a loan for $150,000 against my house. My house. Jason, the one I paid for with my own 2 hands. He sighed, a long, exasperated sound, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, Mom, it's for the best. The house was always meant to be a family asset. It's too much for you to manage anyway. This money is going to fund the business, our future, all of our futures. It's for the family." "For the family," I echoed, tears streaming down my face. "You stole from me. You used my trust, my love, to take my home." Rebecca stepped forward, her face a mask of feigned concern, though her eyes darted nervously between me and Jason. "Mom, you're just an old lady scared of change. You don't understand how these things work. It's a complicated financial maneuver, and honestly, you wouldn't have agreed if we'd explained it properly. This is for your own good, too. You'll be taken care of." Taken care of? I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. "By you? You think you can just dismiss me, dismiss my life's work because I'm old?" My voice was shaking, but a new strength was beginning to well up inside me, a fire I hadn't felt in years. "This is my house, my home, the one I worked for, the one I built memories in, and you cannot take it from me." Jason and Rebecca stood in stunned silence. The other grandchildren, who had been in the next room, had drifted in, their faces confused, sensing the raw anger in the air. They looked at me, then at their parents, their expressions unreadable, but no one said a word in my defense. No one. I was utterly, completely alone. But in that moment, standing there, my heart broken, but my spirit unbroken, something shifted. The years of sacrifice, of putting everyone else first, of biting my tongue and smoothing things over, they evaporated. This was not just about money or a house. This was about my dignity. And for the first time in a very long time, I stood up for myself. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady, a new resolve hardening my tone. "Get out of my house, now." The silence that followed my declaration was deafening. Jason and Rebecca, along with the bewildered grandchildren, slowly, reluctantly, gathered their things and left. I watched them go, the front door closing with a soft click that sounded like a final, irreversible break. The house, usually so full of life and noise, felt hollow, echoing with the ghosts of their laughter and my own shattered trust. I walked back to the kitchen, the loan papers still clutched in my trembling hand. I sank into a chair at the table, the same table where I'd signed away my perceived future, where I'd shared countless meals with my family. The tears came then, hot and relentless, streaming down my face until my cheeks were raw. It wasn't just the money or even the house. It was the betrayal, the sheer cold-hearted deception from my own children. The enormity of it all crashed over me, a wave of grief and disbelief. How could they? How could the people I had poured my entire life into, the people I loved most in the world, do something so cruel? I sat there for what felt like hours, the sun setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The forged signature stared up at me, a stark reminder of their treachery. As the initial shock began to recede, a different feeling started to emerge, a quiet, simmering anger that slowly began to harden my resolve. I couldn't just sit here and cry. This was my home, my legacy, and they weren't going to take it from me. My first instinct was to protect what little I had left. The next morning, my hands still shaking, I gathered all my important documents, my deed to the house, my original will, my bank statements, my social security card. I found an old sturdy metal box in the back of my closet, one I hadn't used in years, and carefully placed everything inside. Then I locked it with a small padlock and hid the key in a place I knew only I would ever look. It was a small act, but it felt like a crucial first step, a declaration of self-preservation. I also started to withdraw my finances, not all of it, but I moved a significant portion of my savings into a separate account at a different bank, one that my children had no knowledge of. I instructed the bank teller, a kind young woman named Sarah, that I wanted no joint accounts, no access for anyone but me. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but the image of Jason's cold eyes, of Rebecca's dismissive words, was burned into my mind. I couldn't trust them with anything anymore. As I went about these small, deliberate acts of self-protection, my mind began to replay years of memories. Incidents I had dismissed as minor or simply family quirks now took on a darker hue. Jason always borrowing money he never repaid, always with a grand plan that never quite materialized. Rebecca's casual entitlement, her assumption that my home and resources were hers for the taking. The way they'd always pushed me to the side, subtly excluding me from decisions, from outings. It wasn't just recent. It had been a pattern, a slow erosion of my boundaries, a gradual taking advantage of my good nature. I had been so blind, so eager to believe in the best of them, that I had allowed myself to be manipulated over and over again. The mirror of our family, once reflecting a loving, supportive image, was now shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. A few days later, still reeling from the shock, I was out in my garden, trying to find some solace among my roses. My neighbor, Clara Johnson, a widow a few years younger than me, was tending to her own hydrangeas. Clara, at 70, had been my friend since childhood, a steadfast presence in my life. She was a retired lawyer, sharp as a tack, and always had a no-nonsense way of looking at things. She saw the redness in my eyes, the slump in my shoulders. "Margaret, dear, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "What on earth has happened?" I hesitated, the shame of it still burning. But Clara was different. She wasn't family, but she was family in a way that mattered. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, the loan papers, the forgery, Jason's cold dismissal, Rebecca's condescension. Clara listened, her expression growing sterner with each detail. When I finished, she reached across the fence and took my hand, her grip firm. "Margaret, I am so sorry this has happened to you," she said, her voice laced with genuine empathy. "But you know, you're not alone. My own nephew, years ago, tried to swindle me out of my inheritance, thought I was too old and frail to fight back." She squeezed my hand. "He learned quickly that an old dog still has teeth. I fought him, Margaret. And I won." Her words were a balm, a spark in the darkness. "You fought him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Every step of the way," she affirmed, "and you can too. You are a strong woman, Margaret O'Connor. You built this life, this home, with your own 2 hands. Don't let anyone, especially your own children, take that from you. You have rights, you have power, and it's time you remembered that." Looking at Clara, at her unwavering gaze, I felt a flicker of that fire return. Her story, her quiet strength, resonated deeply. It was a painful realization, but also a liberating one. I was not powerless. I was not just an old lady. I was Margaret O'Connor, and I was ready to fight. Clara's words had been a lifeline. You have rights. You have power. They echoed in my mind, pushing back against the shame and despair. The next morning, armed with a newfound resolve, I decided to act. My first stop was the local bank, not the one where I'd moved my savings, but the one that had issued the fraudulent loan. I walked in, clutching the loan papers, my head held a little higher than it had been in days. I spoke to a loan officer, a polite young man who looked uncomfortable as I explained my situation. He reviewed the documents, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. O'Connor," he said, his voice hesitant, "this loan was taken out against the equity in your home. It appears to be a legitimate transaction on our end with all the necessary signatures. But it's not my signature," I stated, my voice firm. "It's a forgery, and I never authorized this loan." He looked at the signature again, then back at me. "I understand your concern, ma'am. However, the documents were presented with what appeared to be valid identification. If this is indeed a forgery, it's a serious matter." He then explained the process, detailing how a loan against a property could be voided if fraud was proven. He also told me the current market value of my home, a figure that made my eyes widen. It was significantly more than I had imagined, a testament to decades of careful upkeep and a booming real estate market. The house wasn't just my home, it was a substantial asset, and they had tried to steal a huge chunk of it. Learning its true value only solidified my determination. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding, it was a calculated theft. As I left the bank, a strange sense of empowerment settled over me. I had always seen my home as a place of comfort, a haven. Now I saw it as a fortress, and I was its defender. The loan officer's words about my rights, about proving fraud, gave me a clear path forward. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Jason. "Mom," he began, his voice surprisingly subdued. "Look, about the family project. We've hit a bit of a snag. We need another injection of capital to keep things moving. Could you help us out with a loan? Just a short-term one, say $20,000. We'll pay you back, I promise." The audacity of it took my breath away. After what they had done, he still had the nerve to ask me for more money. But this time, the familiar urge to help, to smooth things over, was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "No, Jason," I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. "I can no longer help you with money. Not now, not ever again." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, what are you talking about? This is for the family. You always help us." "Not anymore," I repeated. "You made your choices. Now you live with them. My financial support for you and Rebecca is over." And with that, I hung up the phone. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The family's actual dependence on me, on my resources, was laid bare, and I had finally, truly cut the cord. Later that week, I called Clara. "I need your help, old friend," I told her. "I'm going to fight them." Clara didn't hesitate. "Good. I knew you had it in you, Margaret. Come over tomorrow morning. We'll talk." The next day, sitting in Clara's cozy living room, surrounded by her meticulously organized legal books, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. Clara listened patiently as I recounted everything, from the initial family project request to the discovery of the forged loan. "This is a clear case of fraud, Margaret," she stated, her voice firm. "An elder abuse. What they did is illegal, plain and simple. You have a very strong case." She explained the legal process, the steps we would need to take. "I can't represent you in court anymore, dear, as I'm retired, but I know just the man who can, Howard Smith. He's a no-nonsense lawyer, a real shark when it comes to justice, and I'll make sure he takes your case pro bono as a favor to me. He owes me a few." A wave of relief washed over me. Pro bono. A real lawyer. This was more than I could have hoped for. Clara then laid out a plan. "First, we need to gather all your evidence. Everything you have that proves your ownership, your financial contributions, anything that shows their pattern of taking advantage. I nodded, already thinking. I have receipts, decades of them. For every repair on this house, every appliance, every new roof, bank statements showing every loan I gave them, every gift. Excellent, Clara said, a glint in her eye. And your original deed, any property tax statements, utility bills in your name, anything that clearly establishes you as the sole owner and that you've maintained the property. That afternoon, I went through every box, every file, every drawer in my house. I pulled out old receipts for the new furnace I'd bought 5 years ago, the roof I'd replaced 10 years before that. Bank statements detailed the college tuition I'd paid for Jason, the car repair money for Rebecca, the down payment for Timothy's car. I even found old birthday cards where they'd written, "Thanks, Grandma, for everything." Ironic now, but still evidence of my generosity. Each document, each faded receipt was a piece of my life, a testament to my sacrifices. And now they were weapons in my fight. I meticulously organized them, creating a thick binder, a tangible representation of my contributions to the family and to my home. The anger was still there, but it was now tempered with a quiet determination, a clear sense of purpose. I was ready. The meeting with Howard Smith was exactly as Clara had described. He was a no-nonsense man, sharp-eyed and direct. He listened intently as I laid out my binder, the thick stack of receipts, bank statements, and the forged loan papers. Clara sat beside me, occasionally interjecting with a legal point or a historical detail about my family's financial reliance on me. Howard didn't mince words. "Mrs. O'Connor, this is a clear-cut case of fraud and, frankly, elder abuse. What your children did is despicable, and it's illegal. We will fight this, and we will win." His confidence was a balm to my still frayed nerves. With Howard's guidance, I began to take concrete legal and financial actions. My first step was to update my will. For decades, it had simply divided everything equally between Jason and Rebecca. Now, I revised it, ensuring that my home and the bulk of my assets would go to Timothy, my youngest grandson, and to a few charities I deeply admired. I also made provisions for Clara, a small token of gratitude for her unwavering support. It was a difficult decision, knowing the implications, but it felt right. It was a way to protect my legacy and to ensure that my sacrifices would truly benefit someone who, despite his casual requests, had never actively tried to deceive me. Next, I went to my bank. With the help of a manager, I reviewed all my accounts, ensuring that no one else had access. No one was listed as a beneficiary without my explicit consent. I closed a joint savings account I'd once had with Rebecca, a relic from a time when I thought we'd always share everything. It felt like severing a limb, but a necessary one. The changes didn't go unnoticed. Jason and Rebecca, now fully aware that I was no longer their personal ATM, began to panic. The phone calls started, a barrage of increasingly desperate pleas. "Mom, please, you can't just cut us off like this," Jason pleaded one evening, his voice tight with frustration. "The business is struggling. We need that money. You promised to help us with the family project." "I promised to let you use my house for a temporary project, Jason," I reminded him, my voice steady. "I did not promise to fund your illegal schemes." and I certainly did not sign off on a $150,000 loan against my home. But Mom, we're family, Rebecca wailed on another call. You can't do this to us. What about the grandchildren? What about our future? What about my future, Rebecca? I retorted, a bitterness I hadn't known I possessed rising to the surface. What about the future you tried to steal from me? They tried every tactic, guilt trips, emotional manipulation, even veiled threats. Jason hinted at how much stress this was causing him, how it might affect his health. Rebecca brought up old memories, trying to remind me of all the times we'd been close. But their words, once so potent, now rang hollow. I saw through them, saw the panic, the fear of losing their safety net. One afternoon, they showed up at my door, unannounced, their faces etched with desperation. Timothy was with them, standing a little behind his parents, looking uncomfortable and confused. Mom, we need to talk, Jason said, trying to push past me into the house. I held the door firm, blocking his path. We have nothing to talk about, Jason. My lawyer will be in touch. Your lawyer? Rebecca gasped, her eyes wide. Mom, this is insane. You're going to sue your own children? You left me no choice, I said, my voice unwavering. You betrayed my trust. You tried to steal my home. What did you expect? But the business, Mom, Jason cried, his composure finally cracking. It's going to collapse without your help. We'll lose everything. That is a consequence of your choices, not mine, I stated, my resolve hardening with each word. I worked my entire life for this house, for my independence. I sacrificed my own dreams to help you, over and over again, and you repaid me with deceit. I'm no longer your financial safety net. You are on your own. Timothy, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. Grandma, what's going on? His voice was small, filled with genuine confusion. My heart ached for him, for his innocence, but I knew I couldn't back down. Your parents made some very bad choices, Timothy, I said, looking him directly in the eye. Choices that hurt me deeply, and I have to stand up for myself. Jason and Rebecca looked furious, their faces contorted with anger and fear. You'll regret this, Mom, Jason spat, his voice venomous. No, I said, a quiet strength filling me. I won't. I regret trusting you, but I will never regret standing up for what is mine. I closed the door, firmly, decisively. The sound echoed through the house, a final punctuation mark on a lifetime of enabling. The silence that followed was not hollow this time, but heavy with the weight of my decision, and, surprisingly, with a sense of liberation. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I wouldn't be moving it. The confrontation at my doorstep was the last time I spoke directly to Jason or Rebecca for a long while. Howard Smith, my lawyer, took over from there. The legal process was slow, methodical, and at times emotionally draining. There were depositions, countless forms, and the constant threat of a courtroom battle. But with Clara by my side, offering encouragement and advice, and Howard handling the legal complexities, I felt a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp autumn morning. The courtroom felt foreign, sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of my home. Jason and Rebecca sat on the opposite side, looking pale and strained. Their lawyer, a slick young man, tried to argue that I had willingly signed the papers, that I was merely confused, an elderly woman prone to forgetfulness. But Howard was relentless. He presented my meticulously organized binder, detailing every payment I had ever made to my children, every repair to my house, every piece of evidence proving my sole ownership and their pattern of financial dependence. He brought out the forged loan documents, comparing the signature to samples of my actual handwriting, the differences stark and undeniable. Then, Clara, as a witness, spoke with unwavering conviction about my character, my lifelong dedication to my home, and the clear signs of manipulation she had observed. Her testimony, coming from a retired lawyer, carried significant weight. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened to every word. When she finally delivered her ruling, her voice resonated with authority. She declared the loan fraudulent, voiding it entirely. My home, my beloved 14 Maple Lane, was mine, free and clear, just as it had always been. The legal victory was absolute. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness. The house was mine, but the family I had built within its walls was shattered. Jason and Rebecca hurried out, avoiding my gaze, their faces etched with shame and anger. Timothy, however, lingered, his eyes meeting mine. He gave me a small, hesitant nod, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. In the weeks that followed, I transformed my house. It was no longer a communal hub, a place where family could come and go as they pleased. It became my sanctuary. I repainted the living room, a soft, calming blue, a color I'd always loved but had put off for years, thinking it wouldn't suit everyone. I rearranged the furniture, creating cozy nooks for reading and sewing. I filled the empty spaces with personal touches, photographs of old friends, the quilts I'd made for myself, not for others, and a collection of antique thimbles I'd always cherished. The faint scent of thread and fabric was still there, but now it mingled with the fresh scent of lavender from the sachets I placed in every room. It was truly my home, a reflection of me, Margaret O'Connor, not just Grandma. My chosen relationships blossomed. Clara and I spent more time together, sharing tea and stories, her wisdom, a constant comfort. My other neighbors, many of whom had quietly observed my family's behavior over the years, rallied around me, offering help with groceries, sharing meals, and simply being there. I joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for. I found a new community, one that valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The consequences for Jason and Rebecca were palpable. Without my financial backing, their family project collapsed. I heard through the grapevine that they were struggling, facing significant financial instability. Jason had to sell his large house and downsize, and Rebecca had to take on extra shifts at her job. The absence of my support, the safety net they had always taken for granted, had finally forced them to confront the reality of their own choices. It was a harsh lesson, but one they desperately needed to learn. One sunny afternoon, a few months after the court ruling, I sat on my porch swing, a cup of herbal tea in my hand. The roses in my garden were in full bloom, their fragrance sweet in the air. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow over my little house. I watched a robin hop across my lawn, searching for worms. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the fight. It had been the hardest period of my life, but also the most transformative. I had learned that true strength wasn't about enduring silently or sacrificing endlessly. It was about standing up for myself, for my dignity, even when it meant standing alone. My family, in their greed, had inadvertently given me the greatest gift, the freedom to reclaim my life on my own terms. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. The peace that settled over me was profound, a quiet contentment that had been missing for years. My home was a sanctuary. My life was my own, and I was finally, truly free.